on how to re-engage veterans as they come home from Iraq and Afghanistan. The prediction is that there will probably be somewhere around 1 million veterans coming home over the next 5 years, both from Iraq and Afghanistan, not to the district, but obviously to the country. And so my thought was, how are we going to, as communities, make sure these veterans come home to what they need? And it isn't something that the VA can do on their own. I've become more and more, it becomes more and more apparent as I serve on the Veteran Affairs Committee. They're good at certain things, they're a big organization, and they can't deal with, it's like any sort of government, it's always the cookie cutter approach rather than looking at specific cases and doing what's best for the veteran. So it's going to be really a community effort to make sure we give our veterans what they need when they come home. And what do they need when they come home? They need health care, mental health care, they need jobs, they possibly will need education. We've got to include the faith-based community in this. So what we did was we put together, last week we brought the chairman of the Veteran Affairs Committee up to Syracuse. On Thursday afternoon we toured the VA hospital and the new spinal cord injury center. And I must say to all of you that we are very fortunate. We have a very good VA hospital here. Jim Cody does a great job as the CEO there. And the chairman was very impressed. There's facilities throughout the country that have a lot of difficulties, and our VA hospital is not one of them. So we had a good tour, and then on Friday we had the symposium. Now the symposium was put on along with Syracuse University, and they did a beautiful job. Syracuse University is really on the cutting edge of being able to educate and work with our veterans. They started out with that EBV program, that Entrepreneurial Boot Camp for Veterans, and then went beyond that. They now have an institute for veterans and military and families. And it really is a school dedicated to making sure the veterans have what they need and the services they need along with not just education. So they, along with us, put on this symposium. We had panels talking about how to recognize post-traumatic stress disorder. We had panels talking about employment. We had the private sector there. A lot of corporations work hard to make sure they hire a certain number of veterans. So the event was extremely well received. We were very excited. We probably had close to 200 people over the course of the day. We had our local veteran service organizations there. There's some just wonderful organizations. Clear Path for Veterans, which is out in Cazenovia. 2 sisters and an Air Force veteran put together this program to train dogs and have veterans train dogs and deal with PTSD. We have Team Red, White, and Blue, which the 2 Irwin brothers, Mark and Mike Irwin, both graduates of West Point, along with their parents, have put together this mentoring program. It's a national program. We're very fortunate. We live in a community, and this is probably one of the things that I, as you learn and as you go, we live in a very generous, good community. And unfortunately, if you pick up the newspaper, you watch the news, you don't get that all the time. You're always reading about the negative stuff and the bad stuff. This weekend I went to an autism walk. I went to, yesterday, the Kidney Foundation had a walk at Burnett Park Zoo. Every week there's walks for ovarian cancer, breast cancer, just raising awareness and people involved. And when you go to these walks, yesterday at Burnett Park Zoo there were 2,000 people there. Some were donors, some were recipients of kidneys, and you constantly reflect on the goodness of this community. And unfortunately, the news being what it is, whether it's the Post-Standard or TV, you don't get that sense of what good people live in this community and how fortunate we are. And that's what I have truly learned over the last year and a half. I do want to take a second here to introduce my staff, and it's on my mind is we had Service Academy Day. The kids from all the high schools come and they get information about the service academies. We had members from each one of the service academies where they were present and just talked to the kids and gave them information about the service academies. And they were the kids are really another area where you just don't hear the goodness, and these kids are the future of America. They come there on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock just wanting to get information, wanting to serve their country, and that's pretty impressive. So we had kids from all over the district come, from Wayne County, from Monroe County, and it was just a wonderful event. And that really is, right now is the time when we hear from the service academies. We've got appointments to West Point, the Naval Academy, and Merchant Marine, academy, so that really is just a great part of this job. So with that, I think I've handled pretty much, you know, those are the local kinds of things we've been working on, certainly constituent service, but the biggest in Washington, when we came home last week, we had two very important votes. The first vote was the student loan vote, and as you know, back in 2006, the Democrats put a plan in place that student loans would go up from 3.4 to 6.8% in July of this year. So we voted on a bill that would keep those rates low. You know, you really, where I come from philosophically, you wonder if the government should be involved in student loans, and to the extent that they are significantly involved. But the bigger issue right now is in this economy when kids are graduating from college, to have their interest rates double. I don't think that's a good thing in this economy. So we voted that out of the House. I don't know what's going to happen when the President's threatened that he will veto the bill. And we'll see what happens. The other vote we had was a cybersecurity vote, which was probably a little bit more controversial. There was a series of high-level security briefings that we all attended. The Intelligence Committee briefed us on a number of hacking attempts and successes, mostly from China, into our intelligence and into our companies in this country. So after many months of putting together a bill that people could live with that balanced our civil liberties along with our national security issues, we voted on a bill this past week. Now, the bill exchanges information between our Intelligence Committee and the private sector. But the private sector, and primarily it's going to be the defense companies that are concerned about companies trying to hack in and get their information. But the whole exchange is voluntary. And so if a company doesn't want to interact with the government, doesn't want to exchange information, and doesn't want to use each other's scrubbers to see whether or not there were any attacks, then they don't have to. They don't even have to opt out. It's just all voluntary. And I think that's the point. I know there's been a lot of hype about this, and there's been a lot of concern, as there should be. Because anytime our civil liberties are at stake, you are concerned. But the point is that the private sector, this is all voluntary. And if they don't want to participate, they don't have to. But they'll exchange information, and the federal government will, with their scrubbers and with their detectors, they'll let the private business know whether or not there were any hacking attempts, whether or not they could see anything suspicious, and they would exchange that information with other companies. So we voted on that in the House, and whether or not that'll go anywhere is yet to be seen. As you know, yesterday marked 3 years since the Senate has passed a budget that is just really hard to understand in a time when our country is so far in debt and doesn't, really there's no good way out of this. We need a spending plan. We need a budget for the country. We passed a budget last year and this year, but the Senate has failed now since 2009 to pass a budget. And so we will again go back to the CRs and not having a budget for this country. It's really reprehensible. And I think it has to do with, if you look at the Republican budget, and it's a budget proposal, it's not law, if you look at how it has been demagogued, I think that the Senate probably has a reluctance to put something out there because then people start whacking away at it. But if we don't have this discussion at some point, we're right now at the tipping point with our debt, with our liabilities, and we talk about it all the time. The debt right now for this country is $16 trillion. And when you look at Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and those liabilities over the years, right now, the liability with those three programs, along with our current $16 trillion, that is probably around $65 trillion. So we've got a problem in this country. And we've got to talk about it. We've got to talk about how we're gonna solve this problem. And folks talk about raising taxes, but the reality of that is that even if we take away all of the wealth, not just tax them, but seize the wealth of the top 1%, that's only $1 trillion. That's like a drop in the bucket compared to what we're talking about. We need to seriously talk about cutting spending. look at the waste in government, look at the duplication in government, and find out where we can make inroads and where we can scale down this government so it's back to its more legitimate role. And then we've got to put a pro-growth economic agenda in place. We've got to send a message to our businesses that you're the solution, you're not the problem. We hear from our businesses all the time, all the time. They don't know how the health care law is going to affect them. Now these are small businesses and medium-sized businesses. They don't know how the health care law is going to affect them. They don't know what their tax rates are going to be at the end of the year. They don't know what the estate tax is going to be. And the regulatory environment about which they are asked to just sort of navigate through. They don't hire staff, they hire compliance officers. And that's not the exception, that's the rule. And it's this uncertainty that the economy just can't get going. So we need a pro-growth economic agenda, and we need to cut spending in order, and we gotta have a serious discussion in order that we can get this nation back on the track of fiscal soundness. So with that, let's start with the questions.